Good morning, perhaps afternoon or evening, sea wolves. I hope you have a comfortable chair to sit in and a nice drink, maybe coffee, tea. I actually have a glass of water here because I already had my coffee this morning. But here we go, 3, 2, 1, and that's good for the throat. So let's get started. Exciting day. Interesting to see that Alex over the last 20 hours or so seems to have made it mostly through the doldrums. He's still a little bit in, but seems like the system is not so active right now. So if that holds, he is going to be able to keep his lead, and the field for now will stay more or less the same. And that's kind of what I want to get started with, because I told you guys that I would tell you about what the doldrums actually are yesterday, and then I totally forgot. So that's what we're going to be talking about today partly, and we're going to look a bit more in depth at the rest of the race course for the next 4 to 5 days. I went over it quickly yesterday, but I think it's interesting to look at all of that a little bit more in depth today. In other news, Jeremy Bijou is back on his way, about halfway to Cape Finisterre right now, so it seems to be doing well. The one Japanese boat in the fleet unfortunately broke their main, so I'm not entirely sure what the status of it is right now, but I saw some pictures in the night of a very big rip basically all through the sail. So yeah, there are some problems there, so maybe I'll have some more updates on that tomorrow. For now, let's get started with a short explanation of the doldrums. It's all not that terribly complicated, and then we're going to get into the prediction for the next few days. So if you look here on my little globe, I'm going to activate the air pressure rings here so you can kind of see. It looks beautiful, huh? And so right now the race is going on around about here, so right between the two continents. And if I zoom in just a little bit on here, I think they'll appear at some point. We'll see some more. There they are. We'll see some more lines. And so basically here we have a visual representation of the doldrums. I'm zooming out a little bit more to make my point. But basically what you can see here from the different pressure lines is that more or less we have two different weather systems on the planet. Now we don't have to get into all the reasons for that, but we have a system that is spinning on the top of the planet, let's say, and we have a system that is spinning on the bottom of the planet. And those systems are going in the opposite direction. So the weather on the top side or bottom side of the planet, I mean, there isn't really a top or a bottom side, but I guess we have poles. And the one pole, everything is spinning in one direction, and on the other pole, everything is more or less spinning in the other direction. Why, how? We don't need to get in that. But the point is that you can see right here between those kind of orangey pressure lines, that right in between there is this zone where you can also see this kind of wake here after the coast of Africa. Looks a little bit, if you look at the flow of everything here, like the back of a boat, what you can see when the water is sort of rushing over. And in a way it's kind of the same. You can see that all of the air is flowing over the continent of Africa, and this is of course very, very hot air, and that's creating kind of a wake here because it apparently has a hard time to get over this whole more jungly area there in the side. And this whole stripe through is basically where those two oppositely twisting weather systems meet. Now, basing meteorology is that most of weather, so rain, thunderstorms, etc., is created by temperature differences in the air. That's really the main driver of everything. So we have the sun, it heats things up, and obviously around the equator it heats things up more than anywhere else on the planet. Now gases, moistures, etc., that become warmer, they rise up. But they don't just go up from our perspective, but they actually gravitate, the warmer they get, towards the poles. The poles of course are very cold. And so basically what happens is, like water rising up when we have a hot day and then kind of condensating somewhere in a cloud and then raining down again very locally, we also see a worldwide movement where all of the stuff that kind of gets heated up around the equator, that goes for water, air, gases, etc., it goes up, but it also goes either north towards the North Pole or north, if you know what I mean, towards the South Pole. It goes divergently towards the two poles, and that fundamentally drives all our weather. So the hot water also flows up. That's why we have Gulf Streams, etc. It's basically hot air that comes from these regions that's then boiling upwards towards the poles or boiling downwards towards the poles, and the poles are very cold, and so somewhere between this hot area in the middle of the planet and getting more and more towards the poles, the water and air, etc., cools down again and then makes its way back to the poles. And so we get this kind of whirlpool, where in the middle of the planet everything gets heated up, and it tries to get towards the poles respectively, but one half of it going north and the other half of it going south. And then once they reach kind of the latitude of Europe, let's say on the north side, or like Buenos Aires or lower somewhere on the south side, then stuff starts to become moist again, etc., and everything starts to rain down and cool down, and you get a lot of weather. And so when this colder air from the north or south meets the hotter air kind of from the middle, we get rain, thunderstorms, and all this kind of stuff. And so what we get exactly in the middle, which is the zone that sailors lovingly call the doldrums, is that when you have such heat right around the equator where the sun is hottest, everything starts to heat up. But in this middle zone, so really the magnetic middle of the planet more or less, that's also where the doldrums are more or less located. They move a little bit up in the winter and in the summer as the sun moves. But in this zone where the heat is greatest and all of this air and moisture also from the sea goes up and the water flows up, etc., half of it kind of flows up and half of it flows down. And that makes it not really interact with each other much. And so the effect is that we get a kind of a band around the planet where everything's moving up and then either this way or that way, but right in between the two of them, there isn't really much going on. And so you get a zone where there is almost no wind. The only thing that you get there a lot is rain and thunderstorms. Why? Because relatively, whenever hot air encounters colder air, either the colder air pushing away the hotter air or the hotter air pushing away the colder air, those two fields interact. And if it's hot pushing away cold, then the hot air will kind of flow over the cold air because it's it can't go under or through. It has to kind of go over, and that's why you see this kind of very vampy, smoky sort of lines of cloud forming sometimes when there's going to be a hot day tomorrow. In the end of the day, you see this like big red sky with like little slivers of silver kind of rolling over, very much. And that's literally the hot air condensating on the colder air, relatively speaking, that you're in at that moment. So it's like a hot pan and you put some water over and you get this big pile of smoke. Well, that's the same thing that's happening with fields of warmer and relatively colder air. And the other way around also, so when cold air is pushing away hot air, basically you have also this effect like on a hot pan. So the cold air just kind of slams and pushes over the hot air, pushing it down, and then you get giant cloud condensate and you get big thunderstorms and rain, etc. And it's the same with hot air coming over. Cold air just takes a little bit longer. So first you see it shivering over, and then as the hot air starts to sort of get more and more over the cold air, they mix and they create clouds, and you always get on the edges of those two systems, warm and cold, you get lots of rain and thunder, etc. And so in the doldrums, you kind of get the same, because you have this band of hot air constantly, floating up. But right around there, the air, is kind of colder. And you have, of course, the difference between cold and night, which is quite extreme around the equator, because in the day it can be, 30 degrees Celsius, but in night it can be, minus 10 in the desert, for example. And so those two different temperatures create very different, air pieces of air that are colder and warmer. And when they collide, you get thunderstorms and rain, etc. And so what is the doldrums? Well, that is this zone. And so it's defined by sometimes almost no wind, which can last for days and days, and often very intense rain showers, very intense thunderstorms, which you can also really get stuck in. So if you have a thunderstorm but with almost no wind, that's of course very problematic. And so that's why this particular zone has a real reputation with sailors, because you really don't want to get stuck in a place where there's no wind to go anywhere, to take you anywhere, and a high likelihood of lots of rain and thunder, etc. So that is the doldrums, and that is the zone that the race is trying to move through currently. And right now it's not so active. So there are different times of year where this is where the doldrums are more active. So they're larger, wider, the weather is kind of more active. And right now we seem to be in a period where, or at least in a end of autumn situation, beginning of winter situation, where right now it seems relatively mild. So there seems to be relatively good steady wind. It's not a lot, like 10, sometimes 15 knots or so, but enough to sail with. So so far no problems. So that was my explanation of the doldrums. So let's take a look at the race. As we can see, our beloved team racers are right smack in the middle of the doldrums right now, moving between those continents. This map is a little bit, it's a flat map, so it makes it look a little bit different, but they're basically right in the middle. And as you can see, wind looks relatively good. When we look at Vendee, we see the same thing. So you can see this kind of ripple effect that happens in the doldrum, where these ripples are kind of a little bit like the ripples that you see in the sand on a beach, like after waves have moved over. And so you can see this kind of ripple effect go through this entire zone. And so the main goal for the skippers is to move through one of the bands when there's wind, and not get stuck in one of these ripples where there all of a sudden can be much less wind. But so far, as you can see, wind speeds 13, 14, even in the more lower zones we see right now 11 knots, something like that. So pretty good throughout, and not really anywhere with no wind at all, and it's all in a pretty favorable direction also. Once they get through the middle, will be a little bit more of some beating conditions, but should be just fine as it seems right now. Now let's look at the field. So Alex obviously still very nicely in the lead. We see Linked Out hot on his heels, boat speed, well, actually still average a little bit lower than Alex. So right now it seems that he has, of course, the better wind ahead. And Linked Out is still only just entering the zone with a bit some less wind. So we're probably going to see Alex's lead expand over the next day and a half. And right behind that we have Apivia and we have Jean Le Cam, who now fell back to 4th position, obviously because we've had the wind really favor the foiling boats for the last basically 2.5, almost 3 days now. And you have to still give it to him. I mean, he's in the front, he's 4th, he's doing really excellent. His boat speeds are, well, his average over the last 4 hours is still, I think, higher, well, almost the same as Apivia, only 1 knot lower. So that is really impressive, and right now still higher than Linked Out, but I guess that's because Linked Out is getting into the doldrums. And then behind we see PRB, we see Bureau Valet 2, and we see Initiative Skur, Sea Explorer, so Boris and Sam Davis very close together. Alex and I, so we were already fans of Sam Davis, but I guess you guys, all the Germans in the Seawolves group, have made me a Boris fan also. So thank you for that. And it's good to see, because I heard that they trained a lot together, and now they kind of seem to be racing against each other also. So doing very well, and relatively 7th and 8th position. I would say really awesome results for them. And then let's take a quick look. Where do we see that? Yeah, we see Medalia here, 21st position, still having fun. Oh, actually, she was kind of sailing with One Planet, One Ocean, but it seems that they have diverged a little bit, and that she has actually Artisan Artpol, Lamia Calais, I hope I pronounced that right, right behind her. Another foiling boat coming up fast now. So, but yeah, still doing well, holding on to the 21st place very consistently. So great result for Pip Hare, I think. Okay, so let's zoom out a little bit to get a good view of what the position is, and then I'm going to switch over to the predict wind here. And as you can see, I have all of the latest GPS positions of the boats in here, and then in the front I've kind of set the course for Alex Thomson and the Hugo Boss. And as you can see, it's quite changed from yesterday. Yesterday the courses that I showed were quite a bit more to the east, one of them actually going quite a bit more east. But it seems that now, with the prediction updated, we see quite a different story, and that just serves to illustrate how much of a snap moment it is, where, you know, today it's already very different from yesterday, and tomorrow it will be very different again. But the main thing that I kind of want to convey and talk about is just look at the vast complexity of this system. So here we have the St. Helena low, and you know, that's more or less driving most of the weather here. We see a secondary low here a little bit more to the west, that's kind of throwing off a bit of an interference pattern, let's say, and then we see here strong winds pulling towards towards the Antarctic, basically. And so this band of air that you see here, these kind of really strong winds that go all the way around the planet. So I'll switch here to media. You can kind of see it kind of nicely on here. You can see this kind of band, and you know, starting here around Africa, you can kind of see that this really moves all the way around the planet. So here we go underneath Australia, and it's all basically one big weather circle that just continues to go on, more or less completely interrupted, interspersed with several lows that are kind of driving it. But all in all, it's one big band of weather. So here we've circled the globe like the racers are going to do. And that essentially is really the race course, right? That's really where we're trying to get. Now, looking at the predict wind and the enormous complexity of the next, well, week, maybe week and a half or so, I would estimate that from the current position, it's going to take them probably at least 10 days, maybe more like 13 or so, to actually get to the Cape. So that's kind of how long it will take to get here. And so we're going to see still a lot of changes throughout the route. But yeah, we have some very interesting things to look at. So look at this first part right away, kind of where Alex is now. He's moving into this area where we have you know, knots that are 17, 20, but probably a bit stronger, because in open sea situations, like right here, the prediction is saying 17, 20, but I would say it's probably more like 20, 25 when you're actually sailing there. And we see a few light spots, we see a few darker spots, but it's generally very steady. However, basically from here till, well, if we look here, now we're about a day and a half, maybe 2 days ahead, we see that we're going to have pretty strong beating conditions. And we already saw in the first part of the race that the non-foiling boats, AE Jean Le Cam in Yes We Can, is going to be very much favored by these winds again once he gets through the Doldrums. And so right now, you know, he's here, he's this blue dot over here. almost through also into the system. And so I predict that in about half a day or so, we're going to see Yes We Can once again produce very high boat speeds that are likely going to be slightly higher than the boat speeds that the foiling boats are producing in this particular circumstances, because this is pretty strong beating conditions. I wouldn't say maximum, but pretty strong nonetheless. And that means that, for the next 2 days or so, maybe 3, I think probably 3. We can go a little bit ahead in the prediction. Let's see. Okay, so this is where we would give 3 days, so 2 days is more or less here. So yeah, for at least the next 2 days or so, we're going to see pretty strong beating conditions continue. And that means that even though Jean Le Cam has had the weather against him for the last 3 days or so, he's more or less going to have the most favorable wind conditions, at least for his boat, for the next 2 days. So it'll be very interesting to see what that does to this kind of 4 liters that we have now. Also, these conditions, so right around the edge of 20 knots wind speed, are perfect for more or less a full sails conditions. So I explained in the previous video about sails, like what reefing is, and that the sailors are always finding a balance between having enough sail to fully power their boat and not overpowering their boat, where they maybe go faster but they start to break things like masts and sails, etc. And the thing is that beating into 20 knots is right around that edge where one might consider putting some smaller sails up, so reefing a little bit, or still keeping full sail. And especially in beating conditions, it's often kind of possible to fly, more or less full sail, or maybe sail with one reef and everything, when you're beating into 15 to 17 to 18 knots, because you have also your boat speed. So if your boat is going 8 or 9 or 10, or in their case maybe 12, 13, maybe 14 knots upwind, you have to add that to the relative wind speed. So I hope I didn't lose half the viewers right now, but if the wind is coming at you with let's say 15 knots and your boat is going 15 knots in that direction, then relatively the wind is going to be coming at you at 30 knots. Understand? So it's like 2 cars coming at each other, they pass each other. If they both go 100, they pass each other at like 200 kilometers per hour. So right around that edge of having 17 to 20 knots, let's say, is kind of a wind speed that might be good to fly quite a bit of sail still, or it might be just on the edge of having to reef. And so it could create a situation where we see a lot of damage, let's say, because it's tempting at this point in the race to sail really fast and not be too careful, especially for a PRB and linked out, really following, trying to catch up with Alex. And so I'm curious to see how they will assess the risk, but I would say that fully beating into wind for 2 days, that's a long beat. But especially at this wind speed, if it's 30 knots or 25 steady, then you're going to reef. But if it's just between 15 and 20, that's right around that edge where you might constantly be thinking, well, I have full sail up right now, it's getting a bit stronger, will I reef or will I risk it? Or you just reefed because the wind was a little bit stronger and then it just drops a little bit and you're thinking to yourself, well, it's still kind of going okay, but if I just put up a little bit extra sail, I can get that 2-3 extra knots of speed that are really important in a race like this. And so to my mind, when I look at this particular weather forecast, especially for the next, so look at this as I browse to it. So the next, this is the tomorrow. And then we have the day after tomorrow, still beating. And then another day, still, broad reach or, partly beating still, depending on which course you choose. Unless you go really on the western course. But that seems to be a lot longer. And that's the only one where after about 2 days of beating, we move to a more favorable condition, especially for the foiling boat. So we might see them go more west. But as far as length of the route, that route is a lot longer. We see Jean Le Cam having a strategy of really taking the shortest route all the time. So if the foilers decide to go much more west, I bet you that Jean Le Cam is just going to go straight through the middle and will put that boat fully beating in as much as he can, and he'll probably build up a lead again if he does that. So all in all, I hope that you're getting what I'm saying. This next 2-3 days will be very, very interesting. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some additional damage, or maybe even one of the boats break in these type of situations, because it's going to be so tempting to either reef, unreef, push a little bit harder. It's right around that sweet spot. And at the same time, they have a comfortable lead. They could also take it a little bit easy and just try to move through this and wait for the Southern Ocean to duke it out. But that's what it's all about. So I guess we will see what happens. But that's kind of my analysis for today, the complexity that I wanted to talk to you guys about. And so I'm looking forward to see what happens. Hope that you guys in the virtual regatta also see my point and will experience this over the next few days. Please let me know in the comment if that helps, and if you kind of find that what I'm saying right now is to be true. Over the next 2 days, it'd be interesting to hear your feedback, and I see you all tomorrow. Oh, and wait a minute, don't forget, of course, to subscribe, like, make sure you hit the bell icon, and if you want to support the channel, I'm like really waiting, because some really cool lights and mics and everything are underway right now, so very soon you'll actually see them in here in action, and you'll see some improvement in the technical aspects of the vlog, and many more other things to come. So I'll keep you guys apprised, but if you want to back the channel, also go to seawolvestv.com and become an official backer. I really appreciate it. So see you guys all tomorrow.